Hello, everyone, and welcome to another great interview for International Conference for Men's Issues 2021. I'm Vernon Meigs, and I'll be hosting the interview with Alison Tieman, founder of
Hmm.
Honey Badger Radio. How are you doing, Alison?
Oh, I'm doing okay. Aside from,
I,
the issue with the head and all of that, but otherwise fine.
that's all right. So I don't know if you get this question a lot. You have a very trademark look about you, those visors and the sunglasses. Is that for a purpose or?
Yeah, it actually is. People it's because I have reoccurrent cluster headaches that are often made worse by light, especially blue light. So I have to be very careful about, and mostly it's because I'm looking at a screen. If I'm just wandering around, I can usually not have the whole getup on. But if I'm looking at a screen, I'll definitely be suffering for it if I don't wear the visors. The sunglasses underneath the visors are because I'm currently dealing with an outbreak of cluster headache. So yeah, I just I have to do that because any bright light will make everything significantly worse.
Yeah.
So I apologize, you can't see my eyes, but that's the situation.
Yeah, but that's all right. I have to say that, but thank you for doing this interview under those circumstances.
Yeah.
Yeah, so can you tell me a bit about your background, in particular, before up until the point you founded Honey Badger Radio, and what are the chain of events that brought you to where you are?
Well, I usually talk about when I was 16 and came back from a all girls school, and but I actually think it probably starts earlier. When I was very young, I actually had this is really unusual, but I have five uncles and my father, and for the most part I was raised very much in a household full of men. And because of that, I think that the whole idea of the feminist fear of men never really became something that made sense to me, if that makes sense, because it's just, I'd always been around men and they'd always taken care of me. So even when I was young and still considered myself a feminist, I actually didn't really get into a lot of the blaming or the fear that I saw with the feminist movement. In fact, what really interested me about feminism, which I later realized it isn't part of feminism, was this idea that having gotten these rights, like the right to vote, I wanted to see women also take on the responsibilities such as the draft. And that was specifically an issue I had. I thought it was a feminist issue. Uh, Gradually, as I got into my 20s, I was completely, let's say, disenchanted to find out that, and had an intense sense of betrayal to find out that no, actually, feminists don't have any room for any discussion of women's responsibilities to society, men, or anything. And they really only talk about rights and benefits and how we can always create equality for women without looking at the situation for men. So I started to look into men's issues. My mother also gave me a book on men's issues initially because I came back from a boarding school, and she was thinking I was getting very feminist and needed the other side. So I gradually started to develop more and more of an interest in men's issues as the other side of what I was being told, and also like a source of the responsibilities that women have. And so I went to college. I started to research all I could about the people who were talking about men's issues. So Warren Farrell, there was the author of The Princess of the Window. I'm not sure if Kathy Young had anything out then, but and also like Lionel Tiger, like all the big names of the time. Although there wasn't a lot, it was only just like half the shelf. But I read that whole half shelf, and so I got really into it. And then I started getting active on a news group called Sock.men. And from there was an individual whose name I forget, who pointed me to a Stand Your Ground, which was created by another men's rights activist, or men's issues advocate psychologist. And I got active there. That was in like 2003. And from there, I just took an interest, started writing about this stuff, starting writing about my insights into why I think this particular attitude is prevalent. And to be honest, I think the feminist attitude is just a scientific version of an older attitude. So, there's nothing new under the sun. They just rebrand it and slap a new coat of paint on it. But so that's where I started. I started up a blog named Gender Attic. Paul Elam from A Voice for Men took an interest in my writing and started publishing some of them at Voice for Men. And then I ended up starting a podcast in about 2013. So
Now, you mentioned among those names you kind of rattled down Lionel Tiger. Now, I have a book by Lionel Tiger that I haven't read yet called The Decline of Males, I think it is. And since I haven't read it, I don't know if it's actually any good or not. What, do you have any thoughts on that book in particular, if you read it?
I don't think I've read that one. I believe, because it was a while. Men in Groups is the one I read.
Okay.
Men in Groups. So The Decline of Males I haven't read yet, because I actually started reading these books in the mid 90s, and The Decline of Males actually came out in the late 90s. So
okay, yeah.
I have not read that one yet, but I do remember I did like Men in Groups. So
okay. You said you grew up in a predominantly male family, right? And so what was it like to go into that all-female boarding school? That transition, from all males to all
it was a lot of backstabbing, and it was pretty it was a difficult time. I don't really like to talk about it, but yeah, that was a lot of bullying. It was, and also, yeah, very radically feminist, because when women engage in this kind of aggressive behavior towards each other, they always need a scapegoat in order to bring back that sense of solidarity. This is what I've noticed, is that women who have this desire for solidarity still often pursue extremely damaging behaviors towards other women, bullying behaviors towards other women, and then they end up having to use men as, oh, they're worse, or, oh, you can blame them for the things that I've done. It's not as, it's not overt like that, but it is covert. And so instead of engaging in those direct conflicts with each other and other women over their behavior or calling out each other's behavior, they just offload it all onto a scapegoat group. That's something I've noticed. It's very unfortunate. I think Nancy Friday said, she's a feminist writer, but it's sometimes some of the things she says I appreciate. She said that we're not going to go anywhere. Women aren't going to go anywhere if they continue to offload their dark side onto men. And I would agree with that. So it was not the most pleasant period of my life. So,
well, we can leave it at that then. So we can shift gears now. So I would say that the last 2 years have been pretty crazy and eventful, I think. So in light of all this, what is your assessment of the state of men's issues up to this point? What is your impression of how things are for men today? And are we doing things right? Are we doing things wrong? How are we doing?
I'm going to take it from a completely different direction. Okay. In about 2016, I was at the Red Pill, or actually it was 2017. I went to the Women's March, and there was also a showing of the Red Pill in Washington, D.C. And I remember because me and Paul Elam and I were walking, and I remember telling him that men's issues aren't just men's issues, they're society's issues. And society is going to fall apart because it doesn't address men's issues. For that reason, it's going to fall apart. And I think that we can talk about where men are at addressing their issues, but I think we're now at the stage where society is falling apart because it hasn't addressed these issues. So, yes, men have men's issues, but even more than that, I think society has men's issues. Like, society has these problems. Our society, as in the collective choices that people make that enable institutions, enable media, enable academia, collective choices in their political sphere. That's what society is our collective choices, the sum total of our collective choices. Because as a society, we have these unaddressed men's issues and these unaddressed behaviors towards men and expectations and condemnations and blaming and all of this other stuff that we're doing. It's society that has a men's issues problem, and how to articulate this. Um, I think men take these issues on themselves and they say, oh, this is a personal failing, or even that this is something that men face. I'm like, no, actually, this is something that society has used men, like you would use duct tape to fix something, and it's failing to fix it. And when men are experiencing this stuff, it's because there's a deeper issue that isn't being addressed. Society is trying to sacrifice them to fix it, and it's failing. And because society sees its problems in terms of sacrificing men to fix them, those problems never get actually fixed. So we just end up sacrificing the very thing that in many cases constructs society, or the ability for society to continue to exist. So I don't know if that makes sense, because I know I can be very high level.
Well, it does, because that's a subject that hits really very much home for me, because my approach to men's issues is that, society keeps on desiring to see them sacrificed
Mm-hmm.
as its own end almost. That's what I'm really, how do I put it, incensed about. And I want
Mm-hmm.
a, a sort of compassion for men, in which
Mm-hmm.
that they themselves as individual men are valued for that, and not as means to end, as expendable
Mm-hmm.
magazines for others. I use magazines as a disposable analogy here. It's kind of
Mm-hmm.
weird, but
Mm-hmm.
but do you get where I'm coming from here?
Yeah, no, I do. And I think that where a lot you lose a lot of men when you say stuff like that is because men want to have this identity of strength and providing for others. But here's the problem. It can only go so far. It can only if you cannot, like, you literally can't say, okay, man, here's a, some men can bench press like 200, 300 pounds, right? Can you do it on sand? No, you can't. Can you lift 200 pounds on something that is, can you do it on like ping pong balls, or in a like a, can you, no. So the thing is that we're expecting men to do something, and then we're affording them no position from which to do it in, and it's a disaster. And then because we have gotten this attitude, or this organizing, almost organizing religious principle of feminism. When you look back at how it was founded, where it came from, Charles Fourier, his formulation was that society be judged by how it benefits women. And you can see that everywhere in feminism, and everywhere in all of the social institutions that are sort of very feminist, which is all of them: academia, media, government. Everything is about judging themselves by how well they benefit women. And in that formulation, any kind of benefit towards men becomes a detriment. So, for example, I'm looking at like Dutch Oxfam, sexual violence in Africa. I think maybe it might have been in the Congo, but there was uh, an organization that helped victims of sexual violence in war-torn countries, or this war-torn country. And the organization was finding a very, very high rate of men being sexually assaulted, and this violently, basically. And they were helping them. And then Dutch Oxfam went to them and went to the director of this organization and said, if the number of patients that you help, the percentage of men who are patients that you take on ever exceeds 30%, we're cutting your funding. Now, that is not just, okay, let's direct funding more to female victims over male victims. That is, if you recognize male victims, if you help male victims, we're not going to help any victims. We don't give a shit. We'll throw the females out with the males. So that there's that attitude that if the charity doesn't conform to this idea of benefiting women and only women, then it shouldn't exist. It should be done away with. So anything that even to a certain degree benefits men should be done away with, like a concern or an issue that men are also victims of. As soon as it's recognized that they're also victims of it, suddenly it no longer fits into that pattern of saving women. And then and it doesn't even matter. Like they could have that man could be helping, 3 men who'd been violently raped and 7 women who had been violently raped that day. And he'd been helping them, getting them help, or getting them medical resources, getting them therapy, getting them, job support, whatever it is that he does to help these incredibly traumatized victims of wartime rape. 7 women, 3 men. He brings on 1 more man, and Dutch Oxfam marches into his office and kicks the women out too. He was like, nope, screw you. This doesn't fit into our formulation.
Right.
It's not even that we sacrifice men. We're willing to sacrifice women to maintain this attitude that what we want to benefit and the only people we want to benefit is women. So amazingly, we're constructing a society that benefits women less because we do not want to benefit men at all, which is like, it's exactly what you're talking about, which is this idea that we almost sacrifice men to sacrifice men. Well, we sacrifice women to sacrifice men. It's crazy.
Well, what is that if not rampant misandry, which they always deny? And what if it doesn't just lead to complete misanthropy?
Yeah, I honestly think it does. It does lead to complete misanthropy. I find the feminist framework to be misanthropic because ultimately it has its own gender binary. And it is definitely a gender binary. They have not escaped into gender fluidity or whatever they think they've done. One gender is to blame and the other gender is the victim. And and they will force everything around them into that gender binary and that construction of how men and women are to be structured. And people are like, the conservatives are looking at young people who are like, I don't want to be man or woman. I just want to be gender fluid. I want to be, I don't know, the color yellow, whatever they want to be. And it's like, well, what do you expect? You're predominant. And to be honest, 99% of conservatives agree with the basic premises of feminism. So your predominant ideology that even you push says that men are defined as being what? As being to blame, and women are defined as being victims. So you got a choice. You can be a victim or you can be a villain. And that's it. That's how they've defined men and women. What a surprise. Young people are like, yeah, noping out of that to an incredible degree. And noping out of relationships with each other. I mean, I just learned that the rate of 2 parents with kids households in the U.S. from 1970 to 2020, one has fallen from something like 40% to 16 or 17, and it's fallen a percentage just in the last year. Like, this is if we continue with what we are doing, we're at a flashpoint now, and we are going to continue with what we're doing. There's going to be nobody getting married and nobody having children. The birth rate has fallen in I think the last couple years, or maybe even the last year, from 2.1 to 1.6. Nobody's having children. They look at the chaos going around in the world now and they say no. And the problem with that is that our economy comes out of pair bonding. It comes out of people coming together, creating families. It comes out of people having children. Like the economy, where do you think the economy comes from? Where do you think society comes from? It comes from that moment in our hominid past where male hominids provided for female hominids, and in return, female hominids developed a preference for the male hominid who was providing for them. And that doesn't mean that the female hominids didn't provide for themselves as well. It's just that as we progressed into being human, women, when they go through lactation and pregnancy, become less and less capable of providing for themselves. Becomes a much more difficult proposition. So as the male hominids provided more, the female hominids could rely more, and they developed a greater and greater attachment to their provider, or the one who's providing during those times. And it's like, that is the source of economy, and it's the source of society right there. Male providership and female attachment. And what do we have now? Men can't provide because the economy is, where is it? And women are women are literally taught to despise men and masculinity. So it's like we're deconstructing everything. And to what end? Because we just want to only benefit women? Yeah, that's a lot to lay on you, so I'll just leave it at that.
That's okay. I mean, it does kind of beg the question, what should be like a healthy set of standards of masculinity and masculine virtue that women should have, or even men should have, I think. Do you have any thoughts on
Well,
that?
okay. Well, first of all, I think that this endless drumbeat of wanting to provide for women's benefit creates this pressure to frame women as victims in everything, which in turn, if you look at like the statistics on how people view women, since the 1940s, we have since people's perception that women have the ability to act in their lives, that have ability to have agency, has declined markedly. Like people in the 40s thought women had more agency and ability to act than they do now. So what we have pursued, this grand experiment that we've pursued, has created generations of women who don't have a very accurate understanding of how their actions produce things in reality, because they aren't told, and people don't recognize the connection between women's actions anymore and the consequences of those actions, which creates very unconscious women, like women who, and not just unconscious women, but women who are totally subject to their own unconscious urges, which they immediately scapegoat onto men so that they never can fix them. And then when they cease to be cute, which is what people call hitting the wall, their life is in shambles, and they don't know how to get out of it. It's a horrible thing to do to women. And the virtue that women need, or men perhaps need to impress upon them, is that their actions matter and they have consequences. And one of the things that I think men struggle with is this idea that sometimes you just have to step back and allow her consequences to play out and to be a consequence. Like the example that I like to use is, if you remember that interview with Kathy Newman and Jordan Peterson.
I do, yes.
Yes, and the moment where she has that stunned look on her face, do you remember that? And she's just blinking at him.
I
It's
think,
the
yeah.
moment where he says, "What about my feelings? What about your effect on me?" And she didn't really have an answer for that. Of course, he walks it back. But that moment where he just, like, that was the moment where he gained an upper hand over her behavior. And that is sort of what we need to see more of, as men saying, no, I am a consequence to your action. What I feel is a consequence to your actions. They exist and they matter. And I'm not going to step back away from it. I'm not going to downplay it. I'm not going to softball it. These are my boundaries. You respect them. And this is how you affect me. And you got to take responsibility for that. And that would probably go a long way to actually healing the situation between men and women, and women, of course, have to be ready to accept that, one, and two, to jettison this feminist notion that men don't care about women, or men don't actually like, which is absolutely ridiculous, because of all the male mammals on the planet, human males are the most keyed to provide and protect for their women. Period. And that's actually very common behavior in other social male mammals. Like you can see it in stallions and wolves, and in the dominant males of any like social group, or even the subordinate. Like they will protect the females and the young in their group. Like this is just something that's very common with social male mammals, is that behavior. And it's sort of reached its apex in human males. So it's absolutely, utterly, and completely ridiculous for feminism to stand up on the world stage and start screeching about society, men ever in any place throughout history or in the world constructing a society for their benefit at the expense of women. And that comes right out of that religious formulation that society be judged by the benefit of women. Once you have that, of course, you're going to have the Satan, which is a society that is constructed for the benefit of men at the expense of women. And of course, a religion is going to see everywhere, because it's what gives them power. Buy a feminist indulgence, go to the feminist confession, listen to feminists, do what they say, give them money, Why? Because sin is everywhere. Satan is creeping around every corner. I mean, it's exactly the same thing, and it is, it's something that goes, I think, deeper than men's issues, much deeper than men's issues. And it is the fact that we have constructed a society in a particular way of viewing ourselves that disappeared in the Industrial Revolution. And that was a very religious, Christian based mythos. And that started to disappear and was replaced by atheism. And atheism, feminism, like I said, is sort of a scientific way of retaining that identity in many ways. And it does it's introducing so many lies, so many misperceptions and ridiculous ones, because when you accept that wherever feminism isn't, men have constructed society for the benefit of men at the expense of women, then you basically have to accept that somehow feminism in the 1960s invented men caring about women. Does that make sense? Like, I've said this to the people won't answer it because it's absurd. It's absolutely absurd. Far more likely, and in fact was what exactly happened, is that feminism merely exploits men's desire to protect and provide for women, and to see society in terms of women's benefit. Like, it's not a coincidence that it was a man who constructed the original formulation of feminism to be judging society by how well it benefits women. So it's like, that is okay. I'll step down so maybe we can process that or
Well,
go somewhere with it.
that's okay.
Your question was that where do you think men's issues, like how we're doing with men's issues?
Mhm.
I think that men's issues advocates and men's rights advocates have done a very, very good job to present to society the problems. Society has pulled its car into the oil exchange. Like I'm blanking on the name, but like the tune-up mechanic, whatever, the mechanics and the men's rights activists have come out in their coveralls and said, okay, you got to fix this. And government and media has taken the list, torn it up, thrown it in men's issues and men's rights advocates' faces, and then squealed out of the bay. And now the society is breaking down. So we've done our part. What more can you do? We have told them, you got to fix this stuff, where it's just going to break down. It's just going to go kaput. And now they're at kaput. So what do you do?
Well, how do we incentivize women to take on a more compassionate approach towards men?
You just got to find, I think for now, you've got to find the women who understand that, are willing to let go of this idea that men are inherently dangerous or suspicious, so you should be paranoid of them, that they somehow hate women or want to get one over on women. It's like, yeah, and the way that, but the thing is that is, I once did an interview with Cassie J when she was doing her um
The red pill or
her I
something
know
else?
it was the red pill, but it was one of the screenings in New York, the red pill screening in New York.
Okay.
And I asked her why she felt attached to feminism, because she was talking about the process of detaching from that belief system. And she said to me, it was because I wanted to be right. And there's, I think, a compulsion, and maybe one reason why I was able to let go of that, and actually really didn't see feminism in terms of being right, but in terms of rectifying a wrong that I thought about the asymmetrical responsibilities between women and men. But there is a desire in women, I think, to be right. And you got to find the women who are able to let that go and be wrong. And what's interesting about being wrong is that's usually where everything cool starts to happen. Like, it's where achievement starts to happen, or development or growth starts to happen, or new things start to happen in being wrong. And I don't think that our society does women any favors in not allowing them to be wrong. But again, how would you incentivize that? it's a very uncomfortable thing to be in. And it's going to be, for now, it's going to be very rare women who can be wrong and can allow themselves to be wrong and can allow themselves to not have knowledge of something, which is the other thing that seems to be very attractive to women. The feminist framework allows women to have better knowledge of men than apparently men have of themselves. And that's not well, first, it's completely wrong, but it requires a woman who's willing to acknowledge that that's not the case, that there is something that she doesn't know. And it's difficult. That's a difficult proposition. How do you incentivize that? I'll
Yeah,
have to get back to you on that one.
yeah. I mean, that's something I've been asking the women among the men's movement, and like we see, it's not a very easy question to answer. We really do have to mull this over, even in the present day. Perhaps it's just a matter of getting them to admit, I don't know,
Yeah.
about something, instead of being right all the time by default.
Hmm.
These perfect creatures or whatever. But I don't know is like the door to knowing, right? Or at least
Yeah.
trying to know. So
Yeah.
it's not a bad place to be in. It's not a subordinate place to be in. So
Yeah. But in my opinion, from what I've seen, like Cassie's Joe was right. It being right is so critical to a lot of women. To not be unassailable is critical. And how do you get off of that? That's quite a drug. To the self-righteousness is quite a drug. And I'd have to think about it. Like in many cases, it may just require a collapse of what sustains them for them to consider that they might be wrong. I mean, look at what's happening today. It's being driven by people who refuse to even acknowledge that they might not be right. All of the, health mandates and expectations that, and because there is enough evidence out there that a lot of the conclusions that people have been coming to might not be accurate or might not be helping, or that it's not going to play out the way they think it's going to play out. The treatment, it was said, okay, you go and do this and it'll be over, right? You just need two treatments. Now it's four. Now it's going to be one every 3 months. And it's like, nobody stops and says, okay, what's going on here? Maybe we're not right. And that seduction of just believing authority is the seduction of being right. You know,
is it more a crippling fear of being wrong than just about being right? Because they're gonna, they might fear being dogpiled for being wrong, I think.
mm-hmm. Yeah, there could be that too. I mean, like I got dogpiled for presenting what I believe to be the truth, and and that was not very fun. And I'm sure other women have seen what I went through. At least some people who were watching and said, "Yeah, you know what? I'll just make the motions and just continue to pretend that they're right." As opposed to deal with that shit. So yeah, I mean, in every case, when you buck the trend, you're gonna get flack. And that could be a reason why there's a lot of women that don't speak out and don't say, yeah, this is the truth. Because like I was talking about with the all girls school I went to, and I talked about how they would bully, and then you would offload that, you would scapegoat men. So that's how it works, with women in many cases. The woman above you leans on you, and you lean on men. You have a place to put that anger and that hatred, which really is directed at other women. You throw it at men, and then you can maintain this attitude that there's a sisterhood, where I don't think there really is, as far as I can tell. And so I've heard women say that one of the reasons why they don't embrace this stuff is because they're terrified of the women who do, and who are politically powerful based on these falsehoods about reality, because they can, and they do, destroy lives. And so it's easy to submit to them and to submit to their beliefs, and then just call yourself being self-righteous or correct when you lean on men instead of fighting back against the woman leaning on you. And it's like it is, it's like it's difficult to get out of that cycle of events. It's very difficult, or cycle of abuse. um it's like this whole thing, it's amazing how they've seemed to, like, the people who believe this stuff, who believe this idea that men have constructed society for the benefit of men at the expense of women, how they have constructed this very abusive cycle, and how very damaging it is to women and men, and it's to get out of it. The incentive, I guess, would have to be what it was originally. If you go right back to the very beginning of it all, okay? Right back to when human society started, when human economy started, it all started with that arrangement, that original deal between, the male hominid and the female hominid. I will provide you the things you need when you need them, because female hominids most likely provided for themselves as well. It's like wolves, female wolves hunt except during, late stage pregnancy and lactation and taking care of the pups, in which case the male wolves hunt for them. But outside of that, they're taking care of themselves, right? Or they're providing for themselves and they're providing for their offspring. That's probably the way it worked for us too. So I'll provide for you when you need it, and in exchange, you will be attached to me. So that's the first love story, right?
Right.
um
One thing I'm
it just
noticing, if I can interrupt, is that you mentioned I'll provide for you when you need it, but that was supplanted by I will provide for you all the time at all
Yeah.
cost.
Mm-hmm.
Is that an accurate assessment?
Yes, and it's something that, like the 1950s Hollywood, that idea of a woman in the house surrounded by labor saving devices that essentially reduce her workload from like 12 hours a day 6 days a week to 2 hours a day, if and turn it into something where she can do things that were usually considered to be enjoyable, like baking elaborate pastries and other stuff. Like, that's not, they do you realize that, like, 2 generations earlier, that would be something a woman would do when she had the time to indulge herself, not something that was considered to be a chore. It was a hobby, you know be that women would be able to pursue these hobbies that they found emotionally fulfilling, like baking, like crocheting, like all of this other stuff that would not actually be bringing an income in and would be totally voluntary on their part. And yet feminists frame that as some kind of horrendous oppression. And yet you go back 2 generations, and women who were doing, like, scrubbing uh, uh, their clothing on those boards, which was an improvement over scrubbing them on rocks at Riverside, would be like, wow, you mean I could actually spend this amount of time baking some wonderful thing instead of doing this? That would have been a privilege. And so, yeah, I definitely mean it. Provide it when you need it, because throughout all of human history, almost all classes of women, even upper class women. Here's the other thing, that up until that 1950s turning point, every class of women provided. Upper class women didn't just have things handed to them. They had to actually go out and politic. They had to raise funds. They had to, in many cases, engage in even military actions in order to maintain their families. And, so they weren't sitting on their laurels doing nothing. They were working for their keep. Even princesses, even Renaissance princesses, were working for their keep. Every woman in history worked for her keep. And then suddenly, bam, this century, or the last century, we invent this whole idea that women shouldn't have to do anything to support themselves. Nothing, not a thing. That's completely new in the history of humanity. And to be quite frank, it seems to have led to the development of some serious mental illness in women. And so when I say that the deal was, when I need it, when I'm incapacitated, you'll be there, and in exchange, I will attach to you emotionally, as also men attach to women. That was the original deal, and that was the original, like, seed of all society, of all economy. Like it starts right there. And if that's screwed up, then eventually your entire society will be screwed up. And it's screwed up. Like it is seriously screwed up now. Not only are women expecting way too much from men, they're not giving anything back, not even gratitude. It's like we've been doing this series on dating and talking about how women approach dating and relationships with men. And it's like, if you are going to look at a man as somebody who's going to save you, then be grateful. And also don't date men if you don't like them. Like, go get yourself another flavor in the buffet of genders. If you don't like men. And it's like such simple common sense things. You don't like men, you don't like masculinity, you don't date them. Go find yourself someone else. Just don't. Like, I mean, if you called up a animal shelter and said, "I want a dog," and they were like, "Okay, well, do you have any experience with dogs?" "No, actually, I hate them. I think they're smelly and I don't like them, and I think they're sort of rapey, and also I'm really worried about him biting me, and I'm actually a little afraid of him, and I really just don't like the way they act and how enthusiastic they are, and every aspect of them is really just appalling." The person would be like, "Well, why do you want a dog?" And then the women say, "Well, I want him to fix my life." That's a disaster waiting to happen. And yet this is something that makes sense. Like I see this attitude constantly with dating advice for women. I mean, they don't even bother with the basic premise. Well, do you like men? Do you like masculinity? It almost starts with this idea that women shouldn't have to. It's like, well, then everybody's going to be miserable.
Well,
You're going to be miserable.
that reminds me of a question, and I'll probably close it off with this question, is that,
Okay.
so without using words like utility and service and that sort of thing, I've challenged women to answer what they actually like about men for themselves. What is it that they really, really love? That's not a means to an end kind of a thing. Do you have any kind of insight to that?
I like, or what I love about men, there's a sort of a unself-consciousness that they have, that I've never seen in women. Um, they just do and are in a way that women aren't. Like, no matter what, women are always aware of how they're being perceived, and in many ways, I think men get away from that. And so there's an unconsciousness to how they exist in the world, or not an unconsciousness, but a genuineness or a naturalness that in how they exist in the world that I haven't really seen with women. I mean, not all men have this, but this is something that I see with a lot of men. And then also, I find that they have a much stronger sense of play and fun, which is probably where the idea that they're humorous and women aren't. But I know that's a generalization, but there's more of a sense that of playing with boundaries and trying to find where the boundaries lie, and also just enjoying themselves and figuring out new ways to enjoy themselves. And then the other thing is, I think that they're very creative in a way that women maybe aren't. And this might be something that women are hampering or are hindering themselves in, because I do see, like, when there are women who just sort of let go of the bullshit, they can also be quite creative. But I find that men bring things together in a very unique way. So I would say that it's sort of like this unconscious way of being. Also very, very sort of genuine. I know that this might be surprised, like this, a lot of women will be like, "Oh my God, that's not," but I think men feel things very deeply in a way that maybe women don't. So there's a genuineness to men and a depth to their feeling. And like I said, this isn't the case, this isn't the case for all men, and it isn't like women are excluded. But this is something that I've found that men feel very deeply, and I think you can see that in the artwork that they create and the songs that they make, and the creativity that they express. So I would say that, um, and there's a certain level of fearlessness too. I think that men have that women don't. That's also enables that creativity and that innovation. So I would say it's that kind of unselfishness, that genuineness of emotion, that creativity, and playfulness.
I really like that answer because I think play is a very core aspect of masculinity in my own
Mm-hmm.
definition. Um, and I think a lot of solutions for men personally to kind of bring them out of slumps is to embrace uh, their inner boy, their puer,
Mm,
which my own presentation is going to be about. But
mhm,
but it's about, you know, they gotta be they have to recapture their youth and just kind of play and like put their passion into
mhm,
things that they are giddy and excited about, you know,
mhm,
anywhere from cars to games to music, all those
mhm.
things you said, you know. So I really
Yeah.
really appreciate that last answer.
Okay. Well, no problem then.
Yeah, well, thanks so much, Allison, for joining me in this interview.
Well, thanks for having me on this Zoom meeting and doing the interview.
Absolutely. And I hope you guys enjoyed it. Signing off for now.
Yeah.